Ladies and gentlemen, first stand is over. What a tournament it has been. There's 5 major points that I wanted to discuss in regards to first stand. I wanted to make them into separate videos, but I didn't really come around to do it. So I figured I can just concentrate everything in one go. First and foremost, Riot Games and League of Legends. We've been very, very fortunate to have very specific results in terms of how much interest there is in the league, right? In terms of competition, international competition specifically, a big talking point was, of course, the Korean dominance that just didn't seem to wane at all. There was some glimpses, right? JDG 23 was a good one, right? BLG making it all the way to the finals. But in terms of the overall sentiment when it came to, of course, the Chinese community, is that the viewership began to have less and less interest in the esports side of things. Because if there is no world where the LPL can win an international competition, what's the point in it all? And this was, of course, a massive problem. This was a conversation that already happened after BLG lost to 5 games against T1 in the finals. There was a massive fatigue in T1 just smacking LPL around all the time. And then when it came to MSI, getting smacked around by GENG all the time. And in regards to this happening at the same time as G2 managed to beat the LCK and more importantly managed to beat GENG, in terms of the impact this has on the aspiration and the kind of hopium supply is massive. Obviously, from the European side, we like beating the LCK in a best of 5 hasn't happened since 2020 when G2 beat GENG and that GENG had BDD and all that jazz. So it's quite some time ago. And it's also, we've had moments where we were close, like T1 versus, of course, G2, but in the rematch, they just got murdered, right? We had Mickey, playing his Poppy, taking them to 5 games, and then we had the infamous moment of no LDR Jinx. So the hopium supply is at an all-time high, and that is so important to the average viewer. So, for example, for me, I love watching GENG play at their best. But I understand if you come into a tournament and every analyst is telling you that they are the best team, and all the markets and the odds and everything is pointing towards the fact that GENG is the biggest favorite there's ever been, and then they just beat everybody up and then they win the tournament, that makes for a very uninteresting product. Very uninteresting product. GENG winning is, in my mind, not a good thing for viewership. But now suddenly, after this first stand, this next MSI is about to be one of the most anticipated tournaments ever. Even in a world where there's LCK dominance and let's say GENG just dropped a beat and now we're going back into, of course, and GENG win it, then it's a story of redemption. It's a story of, oh, maybe this could happen. Maybe they could be defeated here. Maybe they could win. Now there's actually conversation about what happens if G2 rematch GENG. What happens if BLG? Can they keep ramping up? Can they win this tournament? The conversations become so much more widened due to this. Are you stuck in a relationship with a browser that eats your RAM and your CPU, all your resources, and you're just sticking with it because you have this sunken cost fallacy, this Stockholm syndrome thing? We're just sticking with it because you've used it for so long, because all your bookmarks and settings and all that jazz are there. Well, let me tell you, Opera GX makes your browsing experience truly your own and solves all of the problems that I've just listed. First and foremost, to synchronize and not skip a beat at all, you gotta just go into settings, press synchronization, and you can import bookmarks and settings from any of the common browsers. Of course, you press import and you haven't skipped a single beat. Now you can jump into enjoying all of the new things that are truly only on Opera GX. You jump into the mod section where, of course, you can change the keyboard sounds and all the noise that comes out, which is quite satisfying. If you don't like it, you can, of course, remove it. Let's jump into the store. Obviously, none of these things cost. We have the official LOL Esports mods right here. Let's take the Kiana one. Show me. And this is how easy it is. We just press install mod. Wait a small moment and boom, we are up to speed. Ooh, let's take it for a spin. Okay, let's do some typing here. Oh, got that sand sound. And obviously, if any of these noises or anything is not to your liking, you can of course change it however you like. You can mix and match and create your own things here. But what's so nice about the LoL Esports ones that are Riot affiliated is that it comes pre-packed with, of course, the LoL Esports Hub. Here you can keep track of any future international events. We, of course, have First Stand that is currently over. And then, of course, you have all the official LoL Esports mods. If you scroll down far enough, you're going to see, of course, the co-streamers as well. You see handsome people like YamatoCannon here, which is absolutely fantastic. And finally, if all these things that I mentioned aren't good enough, this, of course, comes pre-packed with a VPN, which is quite nice. You can just search for it, and then you enable VPN. You can connect to the VPN with star browsing, making sure that your data is not tracked by your internet provider. That's quite nice. And then additionally, you also have a built-in ad blocker, so you can block ads, and you can of course block trackers. You can add any extensions that are available on any Chromium-based browsers, of course. So that's super nice. So what are you waiting for? Jump into it. Download Opera GX with the link down in the description below. And if you're watching League of Legends tournaments, why not make it simpler for yourself by using Opera GX? Thank you, Opera GX, for sponsoring this video. And I mentioned before that Riot and League of Legends has been very lucky with some of the storylines, like DRX winning Worlds and T1 winning back-to-back Worlds. You know, that storyline in itself is also amazing, because you tune into something, and regardless of how the year went, it kind of puts things up to grabs. Obviously, if we walk into another World Championship and T1 win again, maybe there's some diminishing returns in terms of the level of excitement that can be built up again. So maybe that could be a flaw. But obviously T1 and Faker carry so much of the viewership and so much of the fandom already. So maybe that is like the one-off case where repetition is okay. Because I think the majority of fans just love to see Faker win. But in terms of the impact this tournament will have on viewership, I think is going to be immense. I don't think that we have had this much anticipation towards an MSI in forever. Obviously, there's details regionally. It's like, can T1 qualify? Will BFX keep winning? I doubt it. I think T1's going to make it, but you know, there's conversations there too. You have two teams coming out of NA and two teams coming out of LLC. That's going to also open up conversations, right? It's like, is C9 going to make it when two teams qualify, or are they going to be cooked? Or are we going to live in a world where C9, under even that pressure, they're going to crumble? Will KC be the second slot in, or is someone going to upset them? Will G2's dominance from First Stand and, of course, Winter Split continue on and carry on? There's so many interesting storylines, of course, and I think that First Stand definitely was a catalyst for that, because in my mind, I feel like this is, you know, a tournament that you can reference back to for a very long time, because they were very honest victories. These were just plain and simple best of 5 victories back to back. You can't say they're a fluke. You can't say they're BO1. You can't blame the format. Everyone's playing under the same conditions. Everyone flew over to Brazil. And all of these things, of course, matter, which make them very honest victories. Obviously, in the end, G2 didn't beat BOG. But the fact that BOG won a tournament is very good for the LPL and the Chinese fandom. I think in the back of the heads of Chinese fans, obviously, they walk away feeling it's like, oh, we beat BFX, but we didn't beat Gen G. G2 did this for us. It's the same, always the story is like Caps is the one that is helping the LPL get the trophies. You know, it's always the same. It's always the same. It's like Caps is just doing layups, you know, like IG, there you go, you know. Obviously, IG is very different from the FPX one, because IG actually beat their biggest competitor in KT at the tournament, because people might look back to that tournament and say that the true final was indeed KT versus IG because of how close it was. And finally, of course, the FPX one is like, I still believe to this day that T1 would have beaten an FPX, but the stylistic matchup G2 versus T1 was a very tough one to conquer for them. And obviously G2 beat out T1, one of the only teams to do so at a World Championship, which is amazing, because usually T1, either they don't qualify, or if they go, they make it super far. And obviously T1 has lost to DRX, and they've lost to obviously G2. So the list is very short, very short. It's fantastic, you know. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is Gen G. I think the short version that people always reference to is that GENG choked. But there were two seeds that I planted very early on that made me concerned. Is that in terms of their jungle support play, they don't do plays as three, meaning they don't connect to a lane and then play as three and dominate as three. GENG is the most individualistic team that we have by far. The other detail that I always was concerned of when it came to GENG is that their abundance of strength and their level of play allows them to get away with draft ideas that nobody else would get away with. In terms of course, in the context of this tournament, GENG, the way they lost to both KT and to now G2, looked very similar. If you think back to how KT lost to GENG, it was one of their solo laners underperforming in comparison to their usual standard, and the enemy bot lane just drafting fully for push, where going even is a win for the other matchup. If you think back to the KT series, let me just pull it up just so you know. So if you just look at the matchups that are being played here, right? We have Ashe Ruru versus Sivir, tough lane. KT rolls through with the Kalista, Renata into Lucian Braum. Once again, tough lane. GENG 1-1 game where there's some parity with Ezreal Nautilus into Varus and Alistar, and then KT also played, obviously, Caitlyn Nico into a Corki Rakan. There's a level of greed that GENG gets accustomed to in terms of how they draft their lane matchups. Obviously, as we saw the tournament progress in first stand, there was a massive emphasis on how your jungle and support impact mid lane, and mid lane taking more of a backseat role in the game. Jungle and support dominating, of course, the early game was the number one thing we saw the most. Skumond, Labrov dominated their counterparts in the series against the LCK, and BOG, the big standout for them, right, was of course Shun and On. Jungle and support are the ones that set the table, they set the stage for everybody else to play, because they are the ones with the agency. So that's where the meta has devolved, right? The meta is clearly in the place where jungle and support need to connect, and when we talk about, the context of square drafting, right? Square drafting is something that Tabe talked about, right? Is more like in terms of your four, how can it operate in terms of contesting river? Maybe you pick a champion that is weaker in lane, but in the 3v3 becomes so strong that the lane becomes irrelevant. Focusing on all of those details. While GENG is in that box where, in my mind, they play a very 1-2-2 League of Legends style. Very similar to, Los Ratones. I'm not saying we modeled ourselves against GENG, but something that we struggled against, right? Were teams that were very, very strong in the bot lane phase, or teams that connected with their mid jungle support through mid and then went into side. We played 2-2-1. We had Velia connect through mid and then sometimes through bot, and then we would play too heavy on the lane because we would like to. We played Nami, we played, of course, Lulu. We liked to play the Enchanters, and the way we played them was heavy through the lane. But if you're pushing bot and you have pressure over bot and your support is unable to then connect with your trio and you find timers to invade and find timers to fight on mid, how you connect together is very, very important. And what I want to highlight now for GENG, right? I think this is a team that is not resilient to the underperformance of their solo lanes, because this opens up another, can of worms. When teams go to international tournaments, you often have a player or two underperforming at certain stages in the tournament, and then you kind of ramp up and then you figure out your way as you find your place in the meta. And if you don't, you die. Think about T1 as an example at last year at Worlds. They didn't have a good start. In the beginning, Faker was the one performing the best, and the Faker Gumayushi had to drag some of those teammates off onto the finish line. And that's not to say that Keria or Owner are bad players. They were just underperforming based on their standard. And that's a nature that you need to deal with. right? Because when you go into a international tournament, you get tested on your foundation in most cases. You get tested on your foundation. And if you come into the tournament and the meta stays relatively the same, you fall back on something strong, right? And that's okay. And then you just play the same things, But sometimes the meta shifts and you get tested on what your foundation is. And sometimes when you have those individual underperformances, which can happen at international tournaments, because obviously you fly somewhere else, you don't scrim as much, you don't solo queue as much, and then maybe the meta shifts and you play it less or scrim less, right? Individual underperformance at international is something that you almost have to account for. And I say all of this because the foundation of how you play and the strategies that you lean back on are the ones that are going to get you through. Someone in the chat said, the meta won't shift in the tournament, it won't shift that quickly. It did. It did. Like, there's many examples of it doing so. The meta shifts happen real time. I can give you a great example. If this isn't obvious enough to you, how jungle and support needed to connect with mid, and people struggled with playing more of the hyper carry bot laners, if this isn't obvious enough to you, then think about, for example, 2023 Worlds, right? T1 shifted the meta into ranged snowball bot lanes heavy. After everyone played melees, they played very, very lane-oriented bot lanes and dominated. We had Kalista support, for crying out loud. 2024, when T1 won the World Championship, what happened in the meta, right? Everyone was playing Ari mid, and then suddenly there were two teams that started playing Sylas, and then Galio into Sylas, and they made it to the finals. T1 and BOG were the teams that made it into the finals, and HLE and, of course, GENG didn't adapt, right? They didn't adapt. That adaptation happens real time, and you need to trust your gut to move with that. Even in that tournament, if you think back to BOG, I think that for the majority of it, Faker had kind of a quiet tournament. And also a player that I like super much, right? On had a very weak tournament, even though BOG made it to the finals. Underperformances at international tournaments happen, and teams need to be resilient to them. And this brings me back to GENG. I think GENG is not resilient to their solo laners having bad performances. If Keen and Chovy are not performing at their absolute best, the flaws of GENG really appear. Because let me explain it to you like this. The reason I always say that replicating how GENG play is very, very difficult. Very difficult. Because no one else can walk into a matchup and say, oh, Chovy and Keen are going to get ahead in these matchups. Oh, this matchup is 50-50 for most players. Keen and Chovy are going to win in the game. They're going to get ahead because they just lane better. And for the majority of the year and for the majority of the time, it is true. And that's why GENG looks so freakish, because the way GENG play, in terms of their macro, most of the time is that they manage to play on 3 lanes, right? You have Ruler on the mid, and then you have support and jungle, right? Support and jungle play some shallow wards, they play a very spread game. They play a very, very spread game. This is not something that you see from a lot of teams, right? Because most of the team, jungle and support, they're kind of contesting together. And then you have, of course, you know, your homie, put a ward here. Here they all have a ward. And the thing is, what Keen and, of course, Chovy do so well is that they pull attention to them. And they build information without jungle and support. Which allows, it's like the moment, it's like, oh, Keen is getting ganked by 3 people. Oh, he's dying. Oh, suddenly you see enemy AD is getting dove on mid-wave. Chovy is getting gold. And it's like, oh, you killed Keen, but it's like you are just behind on gold. It's like, oh, great play. They suffocate you by, first and foremost, winning in the lane and then leveraging that to pressure you in the side. And then, additionally, as an additional layer, when you try to pressure them off the side, when you try to pressure them off their game, when you try to pressure Keen off his game, there's always other players that are just willing to capitalize. That's why GENG is like, they get ahead and then they suffocate you, and then suddenly they're 3k gold ahead, 4k gold ahead, because you're trying to make something happen, but GENG tethers so well to the information available. And their solo lanes generate so much information. So much. But if you think back to the KT series, why I brought this up, right? In this series, we had Chovy underperforming, right? Chovy underperformed. And what is KT as a team? Fundamentally, they played the same way every damn game, so they could always fall back on it, right? And that's something that is very durable when it comes to international competition. It's durable. KT, I can summarize their gameplay in 2 sentences. Click mid, click to BDD, and group for objectives. They fell behind in CS and top, sometimes in AD, but they tried to get pushing bot lanes, so their support connected with their mid laner, and then they were jungle and support on BDD screen. It was very predictable, but very effective. Because even if a player underperforms, he knows his role within that system. And the reason I talk about Gen G is because people talk about choking, but I don't think it's necessarily that. I don't think it's that simple. I've thought about this super much, and I just think that Gen G rely a little bit too much on their solo lanes outperforming their counterparts. Because G2 played a very structured game against them, right? I think Chovy played fine. Keen underperformed massively by his standard, I would say. Chovy was okay, but he wasn't anything spectacular. When I see Chovy versus Caps on Chovy, I expect him to dominate and find angles. And the main detail of this, right, is that I have said this in the past. I think that Canyon and Duro, they don't play together. They don't connect together. They don't play together. That's why we see Duro getting caught in the river. That's why we see Canyon only making plays as twos. The moment a team managed to hold steadfast in lane and they leverage things like grouping and crashing through one side and push you out, and you don't get that same level of information and pressure from your solo lanes, you get suffocated. Because Duro and, of course, Canyon were scrambling. In this series, they were scrambling. When Duro was playing Seraphine, got caught in river. You guys remember this? He's trying to connect through mid, he's trying to help mid, and then clicking into bot, getting caught in river. That's a no-go. Canyon as a player, very good jungle, insanely good jungle. In the 2v2's fantastic, but in terms of how collective that spear is, in terms of their foundation, it isn't really there, right? Because that's not how Gen G play. The Gen G method, they stomp and suffocate everyone, because for the majority of the year, their top lane and mid lane can just win lane hard enough. And the same thing for support, like support and bot lane. They can go even in insane lanes, which is incredible. It's like you go even playing Rakan Jinx versus Lulu, Yunara. How is it even possible? On paper, that's a massive win, right? But you need to get something somewhere else. Another great example that I can give you guys. T1 2022. T1 2022 is a great example. Let me show you the tournament in the finals, right? You had, of course, DRX versus T1. This entire tournament, there was an agreement about Aatrox being broken. What T1 did as a team, right, is that they figured out a way that if they have a cheeky counter pick into Aatrox, they can get 2 picks elsewhere, and they can create these dynamics where they don't need to ban something, they gain a ban and gain 2 champion choices. The beautiful thing about that, right, is that it's a powerful tool, but at some point it poisons you. Because it poisons you in a way where you get away with something, and then at some point you don't understand anymore why you're doing the thing in the first place. You know, I was at this tournament. We played against them, we played Aatrox, and we beat them in the group stage. We beat them in the group stage. We played Lucian, Nami, Azir, Poppy, Aatrox. Classic, right? YamatoCannon classic. In this particular setup as well, the Aatrox prior was suddenly raised higher, and they had gotten used to the premium that Zeus was capable of defeating Aatrox with these counterpicks. Winning matchups he's not supposed to win with the Gwen into the Aatrox. Fiora on the live stage picking it into, of course, Aatrox. And I think this is a good example of the poison that sometimes plagues Gen G. And don't get me wrong, I'm not like, there's no revisionist shit here. When Gen G is on, they destroy everybody. It's a very, very tremendous and suffocating way to play when they play a very wide game. They play a very wide game. They win their lanes. You feel like you don't find an angle in. And then every time your Super and Jungle show on any form of vision that they've built, because Duro is good at placing the wards and playing in the in-between, and they play a very wide game where enemy jungle gets to clear all his camps and take it easy and play a slow game while the solo lanes just find ways to actually gain and gather information in the game. But the moment your top lane and your mid lane don't perform at that cheeky peaky, it's tough. Because always the patterns that we see when we get to international performances, you don't get to scrim as much, you don't get to practice as much, you get tested on your foundation. And then you have, of course, sometimes people rise to the challenge and have insane individual performances. I'm not saying sometimes you have insane individual performances across the board and you're like, damn, they're just fucking locked in. Definitely. Sometimes you have a team where maybe a player or two don't perform as much and you need to get through certain phases in a tournament. Because when you put under that stress, what do you have? And the reason I single out their mid and top specifically is because I think that if Ruler underperforms, or Duro underperforms, or Canyon underperforms, it matters less if Keen and Chovy are on because of how they play. Because we've seen that exact thing. We've seen periods where all three of these guys underperform. But as long as Keen and Chovy are on, they suffocate you with the way they play their mid game, and they're going to generate gold leads. And then, of course, this team is stacked individually so they can figure out ways in team fights. Even in some of the moments, if you think back to BFX vs Gen G in the finals, a lot of the wins were individual. Like Canyon walked in and stole a Drake 1v3. There's no team play element to that. That's just Canyon doing Canyon shit. Canyon as an individual player is fantastic. But in terms of team play, Gen G lag behind everybody else. When I say team play, I'm thinking about that basic, raw, gritty team play. Let's group up, let's push the angles, let's push this out, let's help each other out to breathe. Because the way Gen G lost to me with KT and this in mind, the G2 series in mind, was very similar. G2, all of their victories that we saw, besides some deep late games that happened in Nash Steel or whatever, their games looked very similar. Skumond, like they drafted very heavy for bot lane push, right? Whether it was MF Nautilus, right? Or Ashe, right? They drafted for heavy bot lane push, so their support was enabled to connect with jungle and they could play 3 through mid and find invade angles. And then later, they just secured side together with jungle and support, contested through mid, played very simple League of Legends on 2 lanes, right? And then they grouped up for the objectives and pulled the trigger when they had their turns. Strategically, this is something G2 has been aware of. And I don't want to diminish the results because the individual performances there were insane, right? They didn't have insane level of individual performances because that's required to make this strategic thing work. It's like you have to convert. You have to, of course, convert. But all I'm saying is, Gen G as a team, currently, they cannot play close to their level if Keen or Chovy underperform. And that's something that could happen at an international. Your favorite player has underperformed internationally at some point. Knight in the finals against G2 didn't look that good. He didn't look that good. Caps looked way better than him. I can even argue easily that Caps was the best performing mid laner at this tournament, even though Caps didn't have a great tournament by his standard. But I think that's connected to mid lane just being in a weak state right now. Guys, your favorite player has underperformed internationally. Keria has underperformed internationally. Alright? Keria has underperformed. Last year at Worlds, Faker had to drag Owner over the finish line, bro. Like, Owner, the clutch man himself, was underperforming up until they reached certain places. Gumayushi and Faker did the most work. Let's be honest, they did the most work. Honor Mundo. I know it's a meme, but he didn't play well. But the thing is, how resilient you are in those moments is a very important, crucial detail, right? And I bring back to, for example, Caps. Even in the game where he played Azir against BFX, right? He played Azir against BFX. Even in that game, even though it was a low game, right, by his standard, he found a very game-winning angle. That's the idea of what your foundation is, right? When you, as an individual player, is underperforming. That happens on an individual basis, and it happens also on a team basis. In my mind, the only true choke that Chovy experienced is the one against KT. When he played the Orianna matchup in the BDD's Azir, that to me was the main time where you could easily pinpoint this is a fucking choke. GENG as a team, when they perform, I think some of the best League of Legends we've ever seen. But not resilient to their solo lanes, underperforming. And solo lanes, anyone on the team can underperform at certain times. And there's many examples of that being the case. I gave many examples. I gave example of BLG. I gave example of T1. Even T1 last year, they won Worlds. Bro, the group stage was very rough for them. It was close. And what makes Faker so damn good, right, is that under those circumstances, under those pressures, right, his foundation is fucking the most durable. And honestly, I think last year's Worlds for Faker was one of the most impressive ones because I think that he was the best performing player on that team for the majority of the tournament outside of Gumayushi. Because Gumayushi just clutched it up way too hard in playoffs. Way too hard. Like the AL series, the Ash game, even in the finals, like Gumayushi was just, had the best performance ever. So with all of this said, right, it's like GENG as a team, they have a very lane-heavy centric team that play a wide game. Look at the two teams that perform the best. Jungle support, jungle support. You look at the two standout players on both of these teams, BOG and G2, it was Shun and On, Labrov and Skimond. We can give praise to Caps. We can talk about how sexy Ben is when he plays Camille and Gwen and all that jazz. We can talk about it. That's fine. But I'm just saying what is happening in every game on a game-to-game basis, right? And that's once again a reflection of where the meta is at. You know, I always said that GENG is like meta-proof, you know? That's something. But I have thought about this more and more, and now with all the details of this GENG roster, I feel like I can say things more concretely than the simple thing of, oh, GENG choke, you know? Now I've seen enough to see the flaws, you know? I think GENG as a team, I think it's good for them that they get punched in the mouth now rather than later. Keep in mind, they lost more maps against G2 than they did all year long, right? They only lost 2 maps before this. And that's a crazy statistic on its own. It's like in terms of series in the LCK, they were like 60 wins and 3 losses. Something ridiculous in recent times. GENG is a team to beat. But they have some things to figure out, definitely. Some things to figure out. I think in terms of how their jungle and support, because that's the main foundation of a team, how they play together, that's the main thing that they need to work on. Because the last time this team was good at that was during Delight and Peanut era. Because what did Delight and Peanut do, right, as players? Delight and Peanut, whenever there was a meta where jungle and support had to dominate the map, they won the league. They won the league. They did it on HLE, they did it on GENG. And sometimes that's going to be the case. But obviously they got murdered by Fearless. Because both of them play 3 champions. The reason I mentioned Chovy's dominance, right? In contrast to, like obviously the big detail here is, well, if we compare it to Faker era or Rookie era, it's like Rookie had weak teammates for a long time, but was still just like the best mid laner in the LPL. He was fucking amazing when he played in the LCK. Won LCK, OGN at the time. Went over to the LPL and was just like the best mid laner in the LPL for the longest time. The next one in regards to G2, right? People calling this one of the biggest upset in league history. And honestly, I'm inclined to agree. Let's break down some of the other biggest upsets ever. 2016, we have the Season World Championship. There was a humble team called Albus Nox Luna that made it into top 8 in a group with G2 Esports, Counterlogic Gaming, and of course Rox Tigers, with a scoreline of 4-2. Albus Nox Luna, for those who don't know, was a Russian team from the CIS region with the infamous Liquid playing brand support and then playing Anivia and Poppy, Anivia mid Kira. This run, to me, is on maybe on par with what Genji did, if not the biggest upset of all time. I'm still considering because I am putting this information on the board. Keep in mind, this team beat Rox Tigers. They beat G2 and COG, considered at the time solid. G2 was the number 1 seed from Europe, and I don't remember at the time what COG was. I think TSM was the number 1 seed. I think COG was 2nd or 3rd. I'm not so sure. I think they were a 3rd seed, if I remember correctly. This is a very long time ago. Another one that is a big one, of course, we have 2018. Everyone should know already where I'm going. If I go to 2018, if we go to 2018, what are we thinking about 2018, yes. We go to the Season World Championship. This one, I think, cannot be considered at the same level because in the main event, we, of course, had this series. We had G2 versus RNG. Obviously, this is a massive upset. Massive upset. RNG coming into the tournament was considered a heavy favorite. Not a heavy favorite, but a favorite to win it all. Because they won MSI, they won Spring Split, they won Summer Split. They were the only team on a golden road, and they looked just so damn good, especially post MSI. LBL, we always, LBL fans always drank the MSI Kool-Aid that was so delicious. Like, damn, look, RNG won MSI, they're gonna win it all. And then somehow RNG just didn't fulfill that promise at the World Championship. In this particular context, RNG had already lost to Team Vitality and also to C9 at the same tournament. So in my mind, in terms of heaviness of an upset, even though this is a fantastic upset in itself, I don't think it's enough to call this on the same level in terms of upset scale. Because I repeat, RNG as a team was considered a favorite, but that mirror, that glass was shattered when we beat them that same year, right? In the group stage. We beat them playing Draven and Thresh and Sion and Ryze and Zinzao. And we ganked Uzi like there was no tomorrow. He refused to die, but we got to cash out an enemy top lane. Woo! Another one that is massive. Let's see if you guys can guess where I'm going. 2019. Now that's also a really big one. Really big one, 2019. That's the MSI. So people would asking me, it's like, yo, if G2 win this first time, is this the best performance of all time? Yes, it would be. By far. Because G2, when they won MSI, they played a finals against a Team Liquid. So let me tell you how much of an upset this was, right? This match, TL versus IG, keep in mind, IG stomped them in the group stage. IG lost one map, and that was to SK Telecom. They won LPL. This is the World Championship winning roster, right? IG, The Shy, Baolan, Rookie, Jackie Love, Ning. They won the World Championship. Team Liquid beat IG in a very strange fashion. Because this was impossible. This series was impossible. And Team Liquid beat them. And famously, G2 Wunder tweeted ahead of this series, "Get ready for the fastest international best of 5 that has ever been played." This tweet was tweeted before the series was played. The fastest international best of 5 series in League of Legends history is G2 versus Team Liquid at 2019 mid-season Invitational MSI final, with a total game time of approximately 70 minutes and 39 seconds. They beat them in 70 minutes. They still hold the record to this day. So this one is also up there. In regards to other ones, I don't think anything else stakes a claim here or comes close in my opinion. There's like one-off series, right? There's like a single game that a team like Vietnamese took against somebody else, right? There's occasions where that happens. Phung Vu Buffalo takes a game of G2. It's just a single game in a non-elimination fashion. Someone mentioned KT versus Gen.G. Although that was a massive upset, I would argue that G2, the distance between G2 and Gen.G at the current point in time was far greater. Because G2 just got murdered by BLG. Let's remember that, okay? They got murdered by BLG. And then it's Gen.G in their current form. Everyone said this tournament sucks and it should have been an email type shit, right? Everyone's getting 3-0 left and right. And also, they beat Gen.G 3-0. I think that's more extreme than winning 3-2 or 3-1. They beat them 3-0, bro. KT won against some formidable teams at the tournament. DRX versus T1 is also an upset. That for sure is a good call out. But DRX showed so much ramping up in that tournament. The entire DRX run was an upset in itself, for sure. The DRX run, definitely up there. That DRX run was freaky. It's not even that it started at the World Championship. It started even earlier than that because it didn't even look likely that they would qualify to Worlds. Because at the time, BFX looked strong with Prince as ADC. Like BFX actually, I don't remember what they were called. FearX, I think they were called. They were actually looking good. They looked like the better team. And then they kind of squeezed through, qualified to the World Championship, and cooked. Sandbox. I don't remember when exactly they changed the name. On a different day, maybe I'd argued something different because this was so recent. But I really think that G2 versus Gen.G 3-0ing them at that moment in time might be the greatest, like the biggest upset of all time. Maybe it feels this way because it's so fresh, but I can easily argue it in this moment. Obviously, Albus Nox Luna, DRX, and all of these things that we've mentioned are amazing moments too. And maybe on a different day, I would argue for Albus Nox Luna or Team Liquid beating IG. How much of an upset is NRG versus G2? Yeah, it's already like you are comparing completely different weight classes, you know? It's like NA versus G2 is supposed to be like this. But G2 versus Gen.G, the distance is like this, you know? The distance is massive, you know? G2 should be better than NRG, but this jump is not so big, you know? It's not that big of a jump. There was this topic that Tabe mentioned, right? Which is, of course, the concept of square drafting. And then in terms of where the meta is at, I kind of wanted to talk about it, you know? So I already mentioned that jungle and support became the most important thing, and mid lane impact became significantly smaller at this tournament, right? It became significantly smaller because Orianna Ryze were permabanned, and Talia and Azir were nerfed to the ground. If we take a look at what has been played the entire year in the mid lane, Azir, Giga most played for every mid laner, right? Ryze, mentioned already, permabanned. Orianna, mentioned already, permabanned. And then you have Talia as well. So when these champions were out of the pool, mid lane became, you know, a role where you picked for comp or you got counted very hard, right? So there were moments where Mel dominated the game as a counter. There was moments where teams had to pick Victor just to secure the lane. There were moments where people picked Galio in a bad matchup just for the composition. Mid lane currently is in a very weak state. Usually we are not the case, right? I think Caps was the best performing mid at the tournament, but also I don't think Caps was giga impactful at the tournament. We had some crazy Akali performances. There were some like games where counter picks went through and had an amazing impact, right? There were some good Akali spots, good Mel spots, but there weren't like some strong blind picks to really lean on, which is usually the case what we see with mid lane. It's like, just play the mages, and if you do it good, you're a great mid laner. But this time around, the blind picks were kind of hard to figure out. We saw some Aurora blinds that didn't work out. We saw some Annie blinds that didn't work out. We saw some Galio blinds that didn't work out. And then some niche spots we saw. This was an insane Zoe game. This was an insane Akali game, right? Caps Akali or Knights Akali that he played against, into Bilibili, into G2 in that game 3. Mid lane impact was definitely dependent on the spot you got picked in and you needed to counter, right? Whether it was Mel, whether it was Akali, and so forth. So the meta of the game right now is the agency of jungle and support. So something that evolved, I think that G2 is the best way to highlight this, because I criticized them very heavily for the drafting in this series. So BLG really tuned into the idea of making their support a very flexible role. They moved away from the hyper carry bot laners very fast. They were the first one to do so. Here, they slammed, of course, the Shen angle, as you can see here, the Shen angle into the Nautilus blind, into Ashe, because they are threatened of the Seraphine. They slam on Bessa with bans, and this is a part of the strategy, right? The Alistair ban, of course, was a blunder in hindsight. They should have here banned to make sure that they can blind pick mid, but this is something that they figured out. A big part of my criticism in the video that I did towards G2 was the fact that they don't give Caps any fucking agency in the draft. They need to throw a ban his way to secure his blind pick better. Nevertheless, we continued. They went the Senna and the Nautilus. We continue, coming into game number 2. They went the Varus and the Nico, and I think this should be a very, very winning matchup, and I think they didn't have that terrible of a read, but here the problem was that they paired Dr. Mundo together with Sion, and once again, Aurora was blind pick with Ari and LeBlanc ban, and Aurora is paired together with Dr. Mundo. So here, this is very triangular drafting, right? You're not looking at how your pieces actually like pair together, because you think, oh, Varus, Nico, Dr. Mundo, that's a very strong 1, 2, 3. What can we set up this 1, 2, 3 to success with? We need a bruiser top, and we need a mid lane mage, but those aren't really available to you. So you pick Aurora and Sion, and they have very bad parity together with your top side, even though the Varus and Nico prio made sense into Sivir and Alistair showing. But even in this spot, right, maybe if you pick, if you pivot into going Varus and Braum, and then you pick an AD champion in the jungle that can pair with all of the mid laners that you want to blind, suddenly it makes perfect sense. And this is where G2 was making their mistakes in the Bilibili series, where they pick champions that look good in that moment, but they don't think about how you're going to follow through in the 4-5. Because here, as you blind pick, like you pick your top lane into Nar, and you pick your blind pick mid, you don't have a lot of options with champions that are going to pair together well with Dr. Mundo, right? And I bring this back to the context of, before we continue on the Bilibili, the G2 streak of their draft, that's why this one in particular, people had issues with this draft. Here is the same. You go bar Dr. Mundo. Dr. Mundo counters Pantheon, right? Enemy goes Ezreal Shen because they want to have global mobility, and the enemy team needs to find a carry top. You could argue that the Mel ban isn't correct, but they use a ban to set up, of course, their mid lane, which is fine. I think that's okay. Perfectly plausible. They ban Ambessa because that's the comp they ran into the last time. Picking Zayn here, people in chat and people typing in many communities, I saw it. Why is BB not playing a tank? It's because with Dr. Mundo already showing into the Gwen, you have to pivot. And Zayn as a champion here into this composition, he is a sponge that can soak a lot. He made a mistake, died on a timing gank of Pantheon after he saw him mid, and then he was very, very punished for it. But this is, of course, Bilibili's bread and butter. And sometimes in a single BO1, in the context of a BO5, in Fearless, you need to tank it. But the main thing here, right, what happened in this game, the crucial detail was the Pantheon won the level 1, right? Won the level 1, and then it went into bot. And the crucial detail is, if you wanted to set up a scenario where you wanted to end up on something different bot, you needed to switch up your bans, in top lane, then you need to also not prioritize Dr. Mundo. But these are the concessions you need to make real time. You need to be able to play in and out of certain things. Because a lot of people that criticize draft, they never come with a conversation of what should they have done different. And I try very hard to make sure that I say that, right? When I made the criticism of G2's drafting, I said, you needed to do this. You had the option to do this. Why the hell didn't you do this? And all that jazz, right? You have to always look at how you need to connect to the other champions in the game. So let's continue with the G2 drafting point in the previous series. So finally, this was, of course, the massive ass. I think the Caitlyn pick was good. They needed to play Nami, which was a better champion. And then they could have went down. And then they banned Nocturne and Kindred to set up Trundle, which, of course, was terrible because Akali was Giga signaled. So their prio on jungle here was just ass, right? Of course. They just said, Trundle, Milio, that's a combo. Let's play it. This was just like one of the worst drafts we've ever seen, right? But G2 kicked it up a notch. Let's take a look at the adaptations they did against BFX and how it, of course, impacted the meta of the tournament, because they latched on to what Bilibili showed them, which was very important. Seraphine first pick. So we saw the Ashe Seraphine prio became super high, especially with Varus out, Karma out. Karma out was banned a lot on blue to set up the Ashe Seraphine angle so you could threaten it, and that would win every matchup from 1 to 5, which was a very important detail of the game. The beautiful thing about the Ashe or the Seraphine is that you can pivot to MF, you can pivot with Ashe with Nautilus, you can pivot to Braum, you have a lot of options, right? It kind of bloomsters out very well, especially in the opening games where the strongest junglers available are, of course, Xin Zhao, Vi. They pair super well together. Later on, when you don't have these bruiser junglers, these champions are definitely going to be worse. Nevertheless, G2 first pick Seraphine. BFX now, with Karma out and Varus out, they don't want to look to pick Lulu, and they pick Vi and Nico together. Vi and Nico together sets them up for a situation where their bot lane lane phase can be contested. They can pair it with many ADs, and they have options then to pick Ahri on 3, and that's their identity. G2 just slam Ashe and Xin Zhao to have a strong 1-2-3. Here in the opening game, they just want to set up a tank top, and then LeBlanc blind, with the Annie and Sylas out, sorry, not the LeBlanc blind, but the LeBlanc answer into Ahri. Here Ahri is picked, and then maybe you could argue here that Mel might have been a better ban, or Mel could have been picked, but Caps chose not to pick Mel because Nico and Vi can be considered good into it. But a very important detail of what G2 did, which set them up for success later on in the series, is that they banned Kai'Sa and Ezreal. Yunara is the #1 champion for, of course, Diable. #1. But they banned Ezreal and Kai'Sa to specifically invite the Yunara. The enemy needs something with mobility. Yunara was the last one out. He could have picked Corki, but that would have been like as good and into the comfort of Diable. But they invited the Yunara. They wanted to remove the Yunara Lulu from the pool. And this was very intentional from G2. Very intentional. But already that identity of picking, you know, a very, very strong bot lane to make sure that the matchup is good and then to carry on. Here, I think BFX made a massive blunder, right? Something that we've noticed is that internationally, teams don't have a good read of Broken Blade at all. Here you're in a situation where you pick the Rumble to invite his Ornn and you don't take Nami away. Remember, Ashe and Seraphine is out, Yunara is out, Nico is out, Karma is banned, Nautilus Varus is banned, Nami first pick is insane here. All the answers into Nami are out, and they didn't take Nami away. And as you can see, they didn't go Caitlyn Milio. They went the Nami, and then they threatened AD pick on 3, and they offered the enemy to take Corki, and we are going to take Caitlyn away. BFX decided to pick their full top side. G2 found Azir and then Javan on 5. And once again, BFX is in a matchup where they play Kai'Sa and Rakan. They did good in the matchup, but the Corki and Nami are just doing good. They're happy, and this was, a flaw of BFX's side. But the main thing here is G2 were in tune with the dynamics of the game. We continue. Here we have a situation where finally we have Karma out, Bard out, Nami, Nico. So all the range supports are gone, besides Lulu. Lulu is the only one in, but Yunara's out of the picture. You first pick Varus, enemy slams Sivir Alistar. We've seen this in the past. The Sivir Alistar into the Varus. Straight out of the Billabong playbook. Sivir Alistar lock-in into Varus showing. Straight out of the Billabong playbook. BFX could have found the punish by just playing Varus Lulu. That could have been a very good punish. Obviously, here at this point, when BFX was 0-2 down, they were like, yo, let's just pick really, like, let's just lock in champions that we're comfortable on. That's basically what they did in this final game. Clear is underperforming, play Jace. Maybe you're going to perform good. We won on Maokai, let's try to play Maokai. They tried, right? They tried to throw everything on the board. But the Sivir Alice rotation into Varus becomes extra good here because all the range supports are out. But in my opinion, here the punish would be to either go into Lulu or go into Braum, that we saw later from G2. But they decide to drop support, go towards Poppy, and Poppy has no value into, of course, Sion. Like Sion, even Alistar is fake in my opinion, and Sivir. And obviously, if you pick Sivir like this, you need to kind of pick Alistar away because Alistar counters Sivir because you have nothing to spell shield, and your auto attack range is, of course, the combo. But I think that the main thing about Varus right now in his current state is that I think as an attack speed champion functions very well. But in terms of his lethality build, it's been way too nerfed, in my opinion. But we continue. So G2 showed clear adaptation in terms of understanding bot lane. They set up scenarios where the tanks actually make sense for BB. And they figured out ways to actually put caps on champions that have impact, where he doesn't get, blown out by a single counter when he's picking things like Annie and Aurora. And these were my main criticisms against them when they played against BLG. Into the knockout stage, and the drafts against Gen.G. This one made me nervous at first, when they had MF, Nautilus, Aurora, Sion, and Pantheon. The reason it made me nervous is because you need to play a pretty flawless game in order to leverage the details here, right? It's like you have very good matchups, but if you make a single mistake, you're going to, of course, suffer with your champions. But they snowballed, fought very well, really good timings. But the same thorough line here, right? Enemy shows Seraphine, you pick MF. They go Ashe, Xin Zhao, and then you slam Nautilus. Nautilus, MF, Pantheon, they can actually contest. They can fight you back. A lot of people are MF haters because, MF, why did they pick MF here? They can't carry the champ. MF is fucking strong in lane. Really strong in lane. That's why, like, whenever you think, why did this team pick MF? It's because it's strong in lane. And that's it. Anyhow, it worked out. The early game plan succeeded, but the same detail there, right? Very, very in tune with MF Nautilus as, an idea. And you can see here the G2, after playing against Vikla, and Clear, that they shifted now to actually give BB an opportunity to counterpick. Against King, right? That's a shift up, right? G2, now into that Sivir Alistar that we talked about, they pivoted from the Varus 1-2 into the Braum on 3. They made sure that the matchup is still good, Varus Braum strong, and also this was an attack speed Varus, so blessed. I was very, very happy to see this. They slammed the K'Sante blind and then set up for a counter. They got Victor into Ahri, which once again is a winning lane, and then Varus Braum winning a lane into Sivir and Alistar. And I repeat, I didn't think they would win this game. I thought Vi is going to get 6 for free. They're going to kill Victor once, and Vayne is going to be untouchable on side. People wanted to say, yo, Gen.G, why are they drafting Vayne? They're so dumb. My brother, Gen.G draft like this all year long, and they shit on everyone. This is just a part of their recipe. I don't think Vayne is good against Varus and not showing mid lane, right? That's definitely the case, but they win games like these all the time. With Vayne and Sivir locked in, Sylas is worse, so you have to pick a ranged champion, but Victor beats Ahri and is good against Vayne and decent against Sivir too. But Victor is not considered like a high quality champ, it's just that G2 have very strong lanes, right? And in my experience, I never thought that this would be enough for G2. But I just showed this once again, that G2 leaned heavily into having strong 3v3s that can connect with your mid lane, pressure onto the enemy mid lane, and then snowball. That's the meta. That's what the meta was. And G2 did a very good job of holding on to those leads. Jungle and support set the stage, and then it's up to your AD and your mid lane to perform. And Hansama performed. Usually when he's supposed to perform, when Mickey set him up for success. They're in the headlights. But this was a very good tournament for the boy. And then finally, we had, of course, G2. This is something that I predicted with the Lulu lock-in. They took Yunara. And then they slammed Lulu Jarvan, which is very smart because Jarvan is really good into all the other Lulu pairings, right? I think that probably the issue that you have with Genji is that they don't ban Jarvan on blue side, right? That's a mistake. They don't ban Jarvan on blue side. But they thought that Lulu and Nico is an equivalent exchange, so they opened Jarvan and picked Yunara and think to themselves that Yunara is good into Jarvan. But the beauty of this Lulu lock-in and together with the Jarvan is that you lock out the enemy from picking Jarvan and you pick Kog. And then the blind pick Shen doing as well as it did is once again props to BB, because I think this is a champion that should have bled harder if it's in a position to, of course, blind pick. Jarvan is something that Humon performs super good on, but they thought that with Yunara, Nico and Bessa they'll be durable into Jarvan. But the Lulu Prio and then having enough ADs to pick 4-5, something that G2 did so brilliantly here is that they hovered Aphelios. They hovered Aphelios to then invite the ban and then to slam the Kog. And obviously, I've watched Hansama, I've watched him play his entire career. I knew he was picking Kog'Maw. I was screaming it in the video, if you guys remember. Like, when I was co-streaming, I was predicting the Kog'Maw the moment Lulu came through. So G2 threw 0. And that brings us to the final, right? That brings us to the final because now we have two teams aware of the same details of where we are at in the meta. And I already talked about some of these games, but G2 in the opener, first pick Lulu with Ashe and Varus ban. They take Yunara away, Sivir gets locked in into the Jarvan. So here is the same idea. G2 think to themselves, if we pick Yunara and Jarvan away, we will have a jungler that is good into any AD they will pair together with Lulu. Because think about it, there's no AD with a dash beyond Yunara, besides maybe Zeri, that is obviously in a very weak state right now, which is a weaker version of Yunara. You have to play Sivir, Aphelios, Kog'Maw. So Yunara, Lulu, Jarvan is their plan. The issue with blue side, right, when Lulu, Jarvan, and Yunara is a triangle, is that if you first pick Jarvan, they go Lulu, Yunara. If you first pick Lulu, they go Yunara, Jarvan. If you first pick Jarvan, they go Yunara, Lulu. If you first pick Yunara, you go Lulu, Jarvan, and there's no Lulu. So this is something that G2 did a very good job. They figured out the triangle, and they went with the Yunara Nami. No more Milio. Blessings. Yunara Nami, we were the first one to play it in Los Ratones. We picked the Yunara Nami, and then they went Sivir and Poppy. They picked Poppy to, of course, defend and mask the weakness of Lulu and Sivir into Jarvan specifically, which is a very common counter, right? You have something that is immobile, meaning no dashes in any of your carry positions. You're going to pick Poppy, and you're going to tackle the shit out of Jarvan and do all that good stuff. So G2 is very aware of those dynamics, and Bilibili also aware of those dynamics as well. Ari LeBlanc gets banned into Aurora Blind, and then the Annie answer. Annie is a good answer into Aurora, definitely, but I do think that Galio could have been a champion. They just didn't want to pair together Galio together with Poppy. But to be honest, I think that Annie and Poppy is just as bad, besides some kind of, I don't know, they're both Yordles or something. I think Annie is a child. She's not even a Yordle. Gnar gets blind picked with the Yasuo ban. The Renekton ban is obviously insanely uneducated here. Like, why are we banning Renekton? We banned Renekton and Rumble, which is very strange. But nevertheless, I think banning Rumble, if you're first picking Lulu, it does make sense to remove Rumble because it's not good in your comp and good against, not in good in your comp and good against your comp. So I understand where it comes from. And then, of course, BB went for the Yorick counter pick into the Gnar. And the thing is, it's like in terms of, like I thought that he's just going to slam the Sion here. I think it made more sense. I think this was one of the rare cases where I thought maybe you should go Sion here. You could argue that it removes Yorick from the pool of Bin, and Yorick is a good answer on paper into Gnar, but you're probably playing against the guy who's played Yorick the most and Gnar the most. This was a matchup that I think that BB had a good start in, but then the moment he got, any form of disturbance, then Gnar really took over the game, and the 2v2s looked very rough. This Yorick was grouping a little bit too much, but I don't know sometimes if I should blame BB on that or blame the team on that, because he has an inclination to overgroup, and I think that Bilibili in this series really read that play, read that and didn't give him anything, and then at some point Bin was like, you know what guys, I can farm side for free till 3 items, just wait for me. And I think this could have been a spot where they picked Sion instead into these champions. Because it's a fine matchup in Gnar, but I understand the angle of taking Yorick away, Yorick good into Gnar, and then keeping Sion for later. This game we already talked about, right? The Zahen Dr. Mundo. I think Zahen on paper does make sense, but this is also a composition that I think Bilibili. This is like one of those compositions Bilibili could maybe beat anyone out with. This is just like the Bilibili special. Let's be honest. Pantheon, Shen, Galio. It's just the whole ass combo, right? It's just the dynamic of picking Dr. Mundo. You lock yourself out of many options in 4-5. This was an issue we had in Los Ratones 2. We loved Dr. Mundo, but we had to play Kled. And do you remember everyone hated us for picking Kled? It's like, fucking Yamato, he's so dumb for picking Kled. It's like, yeah. It's like, we don't want to be full AP, full tank, you know? These are dynamics at play. We need to, of course, make the game... they should pick Jax here. It's banned. It's banned, brother. So they banned Renekton and Jax to set up the Gwen blind. And this was the massive leverage that, of course, Bin had in this series. At some point, you recognize the pattern of the enemy team, how they are drafting, how they are playing, and you think to yourself, well, I can blind Ambessa, I can counter with Camille, I can blind Gwen, and this, of course, is a very, very tough problem. I don't think necessarily they were out-drafted. I just think that this is a composition that Bilibili is going to win against most of the time. Because I think Dr. Mundo is a good answer into Pantheon. But Pantheon broke the game level 1, and then level 4 again. And then level 5 as well. And that fair play to the Pantheon. If that happens, Dr. Mundo is no longer a counter, right? Mundo is supposed to be good into Pantheon. In this game, he wasn't because he got completely clapped level 1. And then here, on the 5 pick, Jax would have been optimal. Zahen is perfectly fine. But I understand why people might be upset with G2 because it's really, really far away from their identity, which I understand. But the moment you pick Dr. Mundo and you say, Skimond, can you carry with Dr. Mundo? And he says yes, you need to, of course, supply that in the other lanes. He cannot pick a tank here into Gwen showing. He can't pick, of course, anything really here. And that's why I think it's wrong to put the blame on BB. Because strategically, the moment you pick Dr. Mundo, you need to make concessions to your recipe elsewhere. Because they had the most success when they were playing, of course, jungle AD bruisers. Because that made the 2v2 mid-jungle very strong. Here, right, the main problem, I mentioned this from before when I talked about the meta breakdown and where we're at. The main issue that you have to face is that mid lane blind pick is very difficult. And the same thing can be said if you're playing, if your top laner is playing against, of course, Bin, you kind of want to leave counter pick to him, last pick to him, to get him a more soft matchup. Because let's be honest, even in this game with LeBlanc, he actually did, solo kill Galio and so forth. But it's a fair conversation to have. Is LeBlanc just useless? Because maybe she is. That's a very fair conversation to have. I'm just explaining the rationale. Mid lane is in a state right now where it's very hard to find good blind picks. That was a trend that everyone was dealing with this shit the entire tournament. Someone in the chat said, Caps just needs to be Big Balls Billy. Well, the thing is, he was Big Balls Billy the first time they played. And what happened to him? He had zero fucking agency. Game number 3, I think the biggest crime here, in my opinion, is the Aatrox lock-in, right? I think the Aatrox champion just has no value against Ashe, Zinzao, Seraphine, and then also Mel. I think that the Aatrox just doesn't have a good interaction here at all. I was intrigued by the Nivea. I like the Varus Scion Karma as the 1-2-3 opener because it's very likely that your Scion's going to get banned into the 4-5. This was an actual spot where I would have wished for the return of Trundle. I think Trundle would have been better than Zinzao, for example. I wonder if there's other champions we can think of. I think here is a rare spot where you could also maybe have picked a tank. I know it might be counterintuitive together with a Scion, but let's say you pick Scanner here. Your composition is very, very durable, and it's good in the mid jungle, and you're a good shield carrier, right? I feel like there were options besides Aatrox because I don't think that he plays so well, you know. Why prioritize Varus in that game? Varus is a very strong laner. Varus is a very strong laner. That's all. I personally think Varus is overrated as fuck in pro play. Because I think after the nerfs and the fact that Lethality Varus doesn't win level 1, 2, 3, I think it's a lot worse. But the funny thing about Varus, why it feels good to play it, is because people feel free to lock in Rakan and Alistar when you play Varus. And then coming into the final game, we had the Camille lock-in into the K'Sante. The Vi Xayah lock-in was just a masterpiece, because I assure you, I said it on stream too, the plan from G2 was that they wanted to bait the Vi lock-in and then pick Xayah Rakan 2-3 themselves. But Bilibili read it by picking Vi and Xayah and then Alistar into Rakan. It's just... BLG, like G2 just finally met their match in terms of the prep department. Danny was so locked in, and BLG was just really, really on point. They invited the Vi because they wanted to play the Xayah themselves. They picked Rakan and Kai'Sa. Kai'Sa, big comfort for the boy. And then they went Ali. And then in the 4-5, they don't ban any top laners. Camille, K'Sante into Camille should be perfectly fine. And then they pick Victor as the blind pick, because once again the lane matchup is so important, and the Cassio got picked. And the Cassio, you know, into the Victor was struggling, so the Victor blind did have value. But Victor is once again one of those champions where you make that compromise. It's like you're going to be strong in lane, but you're not going to have a lot of value later, so a lot of the value needs to come from other places and all that jazz, you know? And as the game progressed, BLG finally recognized, yo, G2 is overgrouping, let me farm. And then the moment Camille had 3 items, like literally, like look at this game, okay? So G2 is in a good condition, you know? Good condition. But what happens? What did Bin start doing? He just started perma side laning, never letting go. And during these entire sequences, even here, K'Sante's TPing to mid for a 3rd dragon. I think that BB needed to stick around longer and play into the Camille longer and longer throughout the entire game. But G2 is so keen on grouping as 5 on the mid waves that eventually Bilibili just said, yo, if we don't give them a play here, we're going to win. So Bin is going to keep farming. He's going to keep farming. Finally, G2 pulled the trigger, right? And the smite, like they pulled the trigger. And they say, yo, let's gank Bin. And then BLG is doing this thing here where they are masking Bin by, of course, hitting the Nasher, which is a very classic play. I think this is originated in China. Remember, RNG did this with Breathe. Mask your Camille hitting the tier 2 by hitting Nash the same time you hit. And then, of course, K'Sante is trying to chase after. They get the smite in the end, but G2 get a couple of kills and it extends. And then here finally Bin bases. He has 3 items, and keep in mind he has 0 fucking kill participation. He has 1 kill, and then they say, you know what, Bin has 3 items, let's fight onto the Drake. K'Sante is pushing top for the first time in his life, and G2 thought they could get away with it, and Bin just says, you know what, let me team fight, let me murder, and the game is over. You know, the final thing I wanted to talk about in regards to this tournament, I think that jungle is in a place where it's never been more difficult. Jungle as a role has never been this hard. Never. I think this is the hardest form of jungle we've ever seen, at least in my memory. The reason I say so is because one single mistake from jungle costs you the whole game. And it's very rare that a European jungler is capable of keeping up in such a world. You guys remember whenever the jungle meta was like, oh, it's Graves, Kindred, Nidalee, good luck to our guys. No fucking Sejuani Maokai. Poppy. Oi, oi, oi. We are cooked. We are omega cooked. And luckily, for the majority of time, we have some Gragas, Sejuani champions in the jungle that allow us to game, you know. But the reason I say so is because the dynamic of jungle right now is if you invade and then make the wrong... like, let's say you invade, take 2 camps. You can lose the game by not doing the right follow-up decision. depending on how you defend, depending on where you show up and where you move. Understanding jungle dynamics is crucial. I've seen many games where a player does the invade and then doesn't give up the right camps, doesn't play on the same camps. I've seen moments where people invade and they don't re-invade the right camps or like pressure the right camps. Let me just show you like the masterclass that was the game 2, G2 versus BLG. So, I preface this by saying, Yike was really good in Europe. LYON was really good in Europe. Yike outplayed LYON and made him was much better than him in the series that they played. Yike looked terrible against Skewmond. And Skewmond made fun of Raptor, and then Canyon, and then Shun made fun of Skewmond. I'm saying all of this is because jungle is incredibly hard and incredibly punishing. One mistake or one wrong move puts you on the back foot, because suddenly they get level 4 first, they get level 5 first, and then they are on the crab first, and then they get 6 first. And in the in-between, you need to scramble for your camps, and you need to play for info, and you need to focus on your camps as your team is falling apart, right? Take a look at this game. So we had the opener. The opener was Shun invaded Skewmond. On is collapsing. Shun slams his dong down and is looking for the smite. Skewmond misses by 1 health. Thing is, if Skewmond wins the smite, Shun is cooked. But because Shun wins the smite, Skewmond is cooked. Right? So we let it play. Obviously, Shun wants to make sure that Skewmond leaves the jungle. He's marking him, pushes him out. Skewmond needs to go into topside. Instantly, Pantheon crosses into his own jungle to secure his camps. The smite is Shun favored, right? With the Q smite, it should be Shun favored, the Pantheon smite, in my opinion. Nevertheless, he crosses into top side to defend his top side, of course, and then Skewmond needs to go all the way into bot side, and he needs to, of course, collect his golems. He gets a kill, which is very nice, right? I think that the bot lane of Bilibili kind of trolled their advantage, because they could have just focused Hansama with no... he could have just focused Hansama with no cleanse from the level 1, but they sent it on the Bard, and Mundo gets a kill, and so forth. Shun completes his clear. He has double longsword, and now he is stepping forward to pressure Skewmond on, of course, his chickens. So, a crucial detail here is that he skipped his wolves, because obviously he needs to understand that he needs to be on time to take this camp, right? And pressure Skewmond. And then we have another smite war. Skewmond takes it because he has smite and he doesn't. But Shun finds him on the Raptors. That's an additional detail that is so important here, right? Shun understands when Raptors spawns because he took them. So he makes sure he shows that up there on time, because it's not only about taking the Raptors, it's about pushing Mundo out when you find him. Because even if you fight Mundo here, it means that he needs to cross into topside, and you can once again pressure into the enemy bot lane. So either you walk into here, you find the Mundo that should be here, you fight for the camp, and then you push him up because you fight stronger with your double longsword, and you fight him, and Shen is collapsing, you have mid-prio, right? Or he's not on them, you take the Raptors for free, and you're chilling, and Mundo will be fucking far behind. So Shun steps into here to fight and to push Skewmond off, and Skewmond has no option. All Mundo can do now is take his topside camps and pressure the invade on the enemy spawns of chickens and golems. Because if Mundo now in this moment says, alright guys, I'm coming bot lane to defend the dive, he loses the game on the spot. Mundo's aware of this jungle dynamic, and Shun is aware of this jungle dynamic. In the past, junglers would be like, alright, I'm coming bot, I'm gonna be 20 CS, and then there's no problem. You can't. Here he has to take enemy chicken and golem to get the turn back. Because if he goes bot to defend and he loses the next spawn, and Pantheon can exit and then take his camps and take his camps again, he's going to be too far behind. There will never be an angle where Mundo actually gets rhythm into the game. So here at this moment, Skewmond says, guys, you're going to get dove bot, but I have to take enemy topside as a price. And then when I'm 6, we're going to recover bot, because Pantheon will be behind in that moment. So here there's hard trading for BLG, and then of course we have the dive. Shun is just tanking, and then he's walking away as Hansama flashes. And then they get the dive off, and Shun dies, didn't need to. And it is what it is. Still poorly played from G2 bot lane. No, the mistake from G2 bot lane was losing cleanse early, but Ezreal Shen are very strong early. And like G2 are just playing a bot lane that doesn't have prio. Ezreal and Shen are way stronger early than Corki and Broad as a lane. Plain and simple. Now, Scumond now took 2 camps topside from Pantheon. It's not over yet, by the way, the jungle dynamics. Because now, Shun says, guys, my topside's completely gone. We have to invade enemy golems, because if Scumond gets golems, he's going to be 6 to my 4, and they're going to take over river completely, get clean bases, and we're going to be in trouble. So obviously Bilibili are in position to pressure. They cut through mid, on the stacking wave bot, they're trying to trap the Bard, and they're also, of course, fighting for the camp. Because if Scumond gets his camp, look at his XP, he gets 6. And in the end, Scumond wins the camp, right? He smites, and then here he's going to press his W again, he gets 6. Hansama kind of misplayed though, I think he didn't need to take all of this damage, he needed to wait for Scumond to finish. And then in the end here, there's a fucking skirmish that goes all the way. Scumond is taking a lot of damage against the fully stacked Ezreal, and then the Pantheon Q kills him. But just once again, the jungle dynamics at play. Scumond is aware of how important this golem camp is, right? This 3v3 is low-key unlosable on paper now. I think Ezreal is too strong. He has Sheen and Lethal Tempo. Like, I think Ezreal and Shen are just so strong. Like Shen, in these type of fights, the W value is insane. I don't underestimate how strong Shen is in an early skirmish. But there it is. It looked like a great opportunity. Mundo gets 6, you want to fucking fight? I think if Corki didn't start like what Corki did is really troll, you know? Look, Corki is just taking the aggressive path and Viper just gets the jump on him, you know? Which I think was a mistake. And keep in mind as well, having flash on Pantheon when Mundo has no flash also matters a lot here, right? Which is from before. Just no flash on the Mundo. But I wanted to say all of this, that I think that as a tournament, this tournament was insanely impressive from Scumond. We've had many tournaments where jungle is a very difficult role to play and there's a lot of responsibility. And I think there's a lot of junglers out there that get a lot of praise for keeping up in metas that are fucking easy to jungle. Whether it was like Yike at his first MSI when he played like Poppy and Maokai, right? Or you know, some of the metas that maybe Jankos played in. You know, very good, impressive, solid. You keep him up with the best. But this is a very hard meta to keep up with the best. Very hard. One of the most punishing jungle metas we've ever had, ever. So I wanted to end this video by saying, I think this is probably the most impressive individual jungle performance I've seen from a Western player ever. And that's my first-hand documentary. I wanted to round off. I thought this was a very good way to do it. The headlines being, of course, Esports. League of Legends Esports is low-key saved. Genji's collapse, you know. The complicated nature of it. The biggest upset ever. The drafting, square drafting, G2 drafting, and of course, the emphasis on jungle. I think this was a very, very good way to put it. Who did you have as MVP of finals in the tourney? I do think that Bin deserved for the finals, but I think Shun was the MVP of the tournament.